Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. This week, I want to talk about making room for space, but I want to set this story up by taking you back in time to visit my childhood. Now, my dad growing up loved pecan pie. That was the gift from God to the world. My dad loved pecan pie so much that when he learned that there was a pecan pie waiting in the wings for dessert, Dad always made sure that his plate was a little less full than normal. He didn't overload his plate at that point with what he called the non essentials or the appetizers because he wanted to get to the main course, which to him was pecan pie. Now, it didn't matter if those non-essentials was turkey and dressing or hams and dumpling or pot roast and potatoes. To my dad, when there was a pecan pie sitting in the wings, that was the main dish, the main attraction. Pecan pie was the entree, and Dad couldn't wait to sink his teeth into pecan pie. So it became kind of a standing joke that when all of our extended family would gather for Thanksgiving or Christmas or maybe for a Sunday dinner at grandma's, everybody around the table, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my nieces, my nephews, all of the family would constantly try to get my dad to put a few more of the, as he called it, non-essentials on his plate. We all wanted to fill my dad's belly with real food before the pecan pie started to make its rounds around the table. But try as we all might, and we all laughed and had fun with it, my dad would always reply with a smile on his face, and he would always say this same sentence: "Thank you, but no, I'm just making room for space." Now, Dad always made sure that there was enough room in his belly that when the pecan pie began to circulate, he got at least one piece on his plate. And I can tell you, if a pumpkin pie was also present, which was his second favorite and my favorite, Dad had somehow miraculously had room not only for pecan pie, but pumpkin as well. Now, add to that a little whipped cream or maybe a little vanilla ice cream, and my dad had gone to Nirvana. He was in his Peter Pan happy place, and he was not coming back. Now, I grew to like this idea of making room for space so much that when I know my wife is baking a pumpkin pie, which is my favorite pie, I too am going to pull back on the non essentials that day and not going to eat as much as I normally do. In fact, I might even skip a meal just to make sure that my stomach is primed and ready. So as soon as that pumpkin pie clears the oven and cools enough to eat, I can dive in and eat as much as I can. Now, I'm typically good for about a half a pumpkin pie while it's still warm to the touch. So, the standing joke around my house is that I'm testing the pumpkin pie just to make sure that it's okay for the rest of the family to eat. And I can promise you, one slice of pumpkin pie is never enough just to be sure. So, when my wife bakes for a major event around the house, she typically bakes two pumpkin pies. One pie for me, knowing half of it's going to be gone as soon as it comes out of the oven, and then the other pie, and maybe a pie and a half for the rest of the family when they show up. Now, what I love about this is my grandson is learning to follow in my footsteps, and he's a big fan of pumpkin pie too. So, on the occasions he happens to be at the house when grandma's pulling a pumpkin pie out of the oven, he's there to help me be a taste tester. So, we, like my dad, have learned the importance of making room for space. Now, making room for space is about creating excess capacity in our lives. So when the opportunity shows up, AKA pumpkin pie, my grandson and I are prepared. There is room, excess capacity in our stomach, not only to see it and smell it, but to seize it and to eat it. Now, by definition, if we go think about the word capacity, definition says this: capacity is the maximum amount that something can either contain or produce. So capacity defines the limits of what's possible. Now, you guessed it, there's a lesson here, and it's not about pecan pie and it's not about pumpkin pie, but it is about capacity. And I want to open with a question. Are you creating room for space? Are you making room for more in your life? Are you creating excess capacity in your life so when opportunity shows up, you're prepared not to just see it, but to seize it and act on that opportunity? What is your capacity for more? Now, for those of you that enjoy the podcast in different parts of the world, I grew up in the United States. And in the United States, we utilize an imperial system of measurement. It is a non-decimal measuring system that utilizes units like inches and feet and pounds and gallons and miles. And it's a mixed up way of measuring things. But if you grew up in most of the rest of the world, you learned a decimal-based system of measurement known as the metric system. It works on multiples of 10, and the metric system is the global measurement standard for science and trade. Now, I remember as a young boy learning to cook because my mom was insistent as I grew up, before I left home and went out to live on my own, I needed to know how to cook. I needed to know how to clean. I needed to know how to do laundry. I needed to know how to do all the things that were essential to survive so that when I went out and got my own apartment or got my own home, if I was living by myself, I could take care of myself and fend for myself. And mom was an incredible cook. She was an incredible house cleaner. And I learned a lot from my mom. But I remember learning to cook, and mom began to teach me about liquid and powder measurements, and we started with an ounce. Well, I quickly learned that 16 ounces make a pint, and 2 pints make a quart, and 4 quarts make a gallon. And for those of you that use the metric system, you're going, John, this makes no sense. Just stick with me. It's not the numbers, it's where I'm going with the story. But I can tell you this, whether it's metric or ounces or pints or quarts or gallons, if you get the measurements wrong when you're cooking something, whatever recipe you're working on, I promise you, isn't going to turn out quite right. But one of the things that I learned early on is that I couldn't get more than an ounce of liquid or powder in a 1 ounce measuring spoon. Try as I might, that 1 ounce measuring spoon would only hold 1 ounce. I couldn't get more than a pint of milk in a pint-sized cup. So the size of the measuring instrument really dictated its capacity. The size of the measuring instrument told me how much it would contain, and it would hold no more. So if I needed 2 pints of milk for a recipe, I had two options. One, I had to pour 1 ounce of liquid in the container and then pour that into the mixing bowl so that I could make room to refill the measuring cup once again. My only other option was to get a larger container that offered greater capacity than what I had at my disposal if all I had was a 1 pint cup. Now, maybe there was a third option where you could just pour and guess, but I promise you from experience, that never seemed to work out right, and I didn't try it more than once or twice. But it let me know early on that the capacity delimity is real. The capacity delimity says there is a maximum that anything can contain or produce. Now, I was listening to my pastor the other day, and he was telling the story about a garage at his house. They have a 3-car garage, and his son used to use one of the stalls until he went out and got his own place. And after his son moved out, lo and behold, that parking stall that used to be where his son parked his car started to become a storage shed. Slowly, unceremoniously over time, boxes begin to fill the space, and today you can't even walk into that area of the garage because it's wall to wall, all the way to the ceiling with boxes. So if his son were to come home for a visit, rather than being able to park the car in the garage, his son would have to park the car outside because there's no space to put the car in the garage. What was excess capacity because the car had left the garage had been filled to the ceiling with stuff. As my pastor said, mostly junk that would never be used again, but for some reason, they thought they would hold on to it just in case, and lo and behold, the junk filled what was valuable space to capacity. So that begs the question, what's taking up valuable space in your life? Because I've authored a book on success, matter of fact, the book is Black Belt Secrets of Success, I'm asked often when I do keynotes and speeches and trainings around the country, I teach on the subject of success. Matter of fact, I've taught about success blockers time and time again, the roadblocks, the obstacles we often put in our own way that hold us back from experiencing more success in our lives. Matter of fact, I've been asked so many times about this topic, I've actually created an online course to help individuals just like you identify and remove the stuff, the junk in their lives that's taking up valuable space. And that junk is preventing them from experiencing more success in their lives. You can find that online resource if you're interested at blackbeltleadership.com. But when I begin to talk to people about the success blockers in their lives, and we're doing Q&A at the end of a keynote or at the end of a teaching or a training session, one of the things I find is for many, many people, what they've put in their excess capacity space are limiting beliefs. Beliefs that hold them back from believing that they are capable of saying, doing, and becoming more. For other people, they fill their excess capacity with doubt and fear. And for other people, it's simply the acceptance of the status quo. It's always been this way. It's always going to be this way. Why change? For other people, they filled excess capacity with bad habits that aren't serving them well. For other people, it's feelings of inferiority or feelings of insecurity. And as a result of that, they don't believe they're capable of moving forward. Again, going back to limiting beliefs. Now, these and many, many others like that are the success blockers that far too many people allow in their lives, and they fill the valuable thinking space that will allow them to expand the quality of their thinking with junk that's holding them back. And when we fill our thoughts and our lives with useless thoughts that simply hold us back, guess what? We're leaving no room in our thinking to learn, to grow, to improve, and to increase our capacity and our belief that we can say, that we can do, that we can become, and that we can accomplish more. Now, here's the truth I want you to get. And if you get nothing else out of today's teaching, I want you to get this. Once you reach your capacity, there's no room for anything more. Let me say that again. Once you reach your capacity, there is no room for anything more. Now, in science, we learn about the principle of solidity. What is solidity? It says that no two physical objects can occupy the same space at the same time. It is a physical limitation of matter. Now, think about my pastor's son trying to come home. He can't put his car in the garage because the garage is full of stuff. Again, two things can't fill the same space at the same time. Like the pint measuring cup, something has to be emptied out before there's room for more. Because once we reach our capacity, what is it? There's no room for anything more. So if our minds are filled with limiting beliefs, if our minds are filled with doubt and fear, if our minds are filled with bad habits or feelings of insecurity or inferiority or acceptance of the status quo, there's little room, if any, for anything else in our lives. And we wonder why nothing changes. Maybe we need to examine what we're keeping and holding on to that may be holding us back. And remember, if what we focus on expands, and we're focusing on all the wrong things in our thinking all the time, we end up filling our minds with thoughts that hold us back. And that leaves no room for thoughts or beliefs or ideas that can give us the opportunity to move forward. So you and I, what do we need to do to change that? We've got to start making room for space. Thank you, Dad, for the idea. Because if we don't make room for space, you and I are going to stay where we are, as we are, unchanged for the rest of our lives. Why? Because once we reach our capacity, there's no room for anything more. Now, again, we got to remember the capacity dilemma is real. The capacity dilemma says there is a limit to what anything and everything can contain or produce. So we either have to do one of two things. We either have to increase our capacity so there's room for more outside of the junk we're holding on to, or we got to clean out some of the junk that's already there so we can expand the capacity that we already have. Or maybe, just maybe, we do a bit of both. So making room for space starts with our thoughts. Now, why would you say, John, why would you say it starts with our thoughts? Because if you've listened to this podcast for any period of time or you've read any of my books, you know I often say, as we think, we say, we do, and we become. So think about the logical conclusion of that. If we're thinking negative, limiting, fearful thoughts, what's the outcome? We become a negative, limited, fearful person. But if we remove and replace our negative thinking with positive, limitless, fearless thoughts, what happens? We transform our lives to become a positive, limitless, fearless person. So how do we do that? Well, it starts with challenging the status quo and not settling for good enough. I would encourage you, if you've never read it, to go pick up Dave Schwartz's classic book, The Magic of Thinking Big. That is one of those transformational books that I have bought and given to several of my kids. Those that have read it, their lives have been changed. For my kids that have the book and have never cracked the cover, nothing's yet changed in their lives. But in this classic book, and you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, many of the online bookstores, The Magic of Thinking Big, in that book, Dave Schwartz reminds us that if we simply believe bigger things, we can live bigger lives. Think about it. A big idea is no harder to achieve than a small idea. It only requires that you and I make room for space so we can believe bigger things and ultimately live bigger lives. So we do that by changing the I can'ts in our lives and throwing those out to make room for the I cans in our lives. We do that by changing the I won'ts in our lives so that we can replace those with I will in our lives. French psychologist Emile Coué, he taught his patients, the individuals that he worked with, as he was helping them overcome obstacles in their lives, he taught them to make room for space by expanding their capacity to believe in themselves. And he did it in a very simple way. He encouraged them several times a day to recite a very simple affirmation. Here is that affirmation. Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. Now, think about the simplicity of that statement, but also think about the power of that statement. Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. If we are the sum total of our thoughts, and as we think, we say, we do, and we become, what was Coué doing? He was training his patients, the clients that he worked with that were struggling to experience life more fully. He was challenging them to create excess capacity by replacing the thoughts that weren't serving them well with thoughts that would serve them well and better. So again, he was using the power of affirmation to expand existing capacity, making better use of what's already present and what's already available to each and every one of us. Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. So that's one of the easy ways that we can create excess capacity in the space we already have by simply removing some of the junk that's holding us back and creating the capacity so that we can learn, we can apply, we can stretch, we can grow, and we can become a better version of ourselves. But what about increasing capacity? Success is about becoming a little bit better every single day. I talk often about the 1% rule, that if we can get 1% better in one area of our life every single day and do that day after day after day, we can increase our capacity to say and do and become and accomplish more. And this is where personal growth comes in. Now, by definition, if you go look up personal growth is the continuous, intentional journey. Get that. A continuous, intentional journey of improving oneself by, get this, developing new skills, developing new awareness, and developing behaviors that enhance our overall well-being and our capacity to reach our full potential. Let me give you that definition again. Personal growth, the continuous intentional journey of improving oneself by developing new skills, awareness, and behaviors that enhance our overall well-being so that we can reach our full potential. It is about expanding and increasing our capacity beyond what we can hold today. It's like growing ourselves from being a 1-pint container to a quart or to a gallon container, expanding the capacity of what we can say and do and become. To me, it's very simply becoming a better version of ourselves every single day by simply identifying areas for change and taking the steps necessary to grow ourselves rather than simply remaining static where we are, as we are, unchanged. Now, to grow, remember, we talked about a growth journey. To grow means to expand, to become larger, or to increase capacity. Did you get that? Personal growth is a personal effort to expand, to become larger to increase our capacity. Growth is making room for even more space. Now, you and I, we all go through stages in our personal growth journey. And until we start on a personal growth journey, we don't know what we don't know in order to grow. But once we start down that path and we start learning, we begin to discover what we need to know in order to grow. And as we begin to apply what we're discovering, now we're learning more about what we need to know in order to grow. And guess what? We start to grow, we start to expand, and we start to increase our capacity. But along the way, something else happens. Because as we expand the quality of our thinking, we start to realize there is still more we don't know, we need to know in order to keep growing. So now we go deeper in our learning. Now we begin to discover even more of what we need to know in order to keep growing. And that cycle of growth continues. And as you and I, as we apply the more that we're discovering, we're now learning more of what we need to know in order to grow at an ever expanding, deeper, more intense level. And we continue to grow deeper. We continue to expand farther. And all of a sudden, we've realized we've dramatically increased our capacity. You got to remember, as we expand the quality of our thinking, we are increasing the capacity. We are increasing the quantity and the quality of our saying, our doing, our becoming, and our accomplishing. This is how you and I make more room for space. You got to remember, the capacity dilemma is real. It's the maximum that something can contain or produce. And once you and I reach our capacity, there's no room for anything more. So when we find ourselves hitting that wall and we discover we are at our capacity, we've got three choices. And let me give them to you as we get ready to wrap up today's lesson. The first choice we have is to accept the capacity limitation. Just to say, that's it, I've gone as far as I can go, no farther. And when we accept the capacity limitation, we are choosing to remain where we are, as we are, and our lives will remain that way forever. We will live the rest of our lives unchanged. And when we accept the capacity limitation, we choose to settle for less. We choose to limit our potential, and we choose to stifle the success that we could ultimately experience in our lives if we made a different choice. Now, the second choice we have is this. We can expand our capacity by replacing the thoughts that aren't serving us well with thoughts that do. I talk about this often on the podcast, and it's a very simple process of changing our thinking by replacing negative, limited beliefs with positive, limitless beliefs. We do that through affirmations, and we do that through personal growth. But as we begin to expand the capacity of our thinking by replacing thoughts that aren't serving us well with thoughts that do, we begin to expand our existing capacity. Why? Because we're making room for space. And when we expand our existing capacity by getting the junk out of our lives, now we're opening up the opportunity and our potential for growth and our potential to experience success at a higher level in our lives. But the third option is even better. The third option, we make the conscious decision to engage in intentional, personal, daily growth. So we not only replace the thoughts that aren't serving us well with thoughts that do, but we begin to learn, we begin to grow, and we begin to apply, learning what we need to know to keep growing and constantly searching for what else we need to learn and grow and to apply in our lives so we continually get better every single day. And as we do that, we increase our capacity. We increase the quality of our thinking. And as we increase the quality of our thinking, again, we're increasing the quality of our saying, our doing, our becoming, and our ability to accomplish more. And as a result of that, we experience more success in our lives. So there's only three options. We accept the capacity limitation. We simply begin to get rid of some of the junk in our lives to create some space so that we can bring some positive thoughts to hopefully overwhelm or overcome or at least combat with the negative thoughts in our lives. Or we engage in daily intentional personal growth so that we reframe and retransform who we are to become a better version of who we are and what we do every single day. We got three options, and as always, the choice is yours. The choice is mine. Every single day, we get to choose option one, option two, or option three. And sometimes we have to make that choice many, many times in the same day. But again, the choice is yours. The choice is mine. We can only point the finger at ourselves. So you got to remember, and I've told my kids this from the time that they were young, life is a series of choices and consequences. You and I, we get to choose the choices, but the consequences of our lives happen as a result of the choices that you and I are making. So think about the three choices I've shared. We can accept the limitation. We can begin to replace some of the junk that's there to create capacity to add some positive things to our lives, or we can engage in transformation and truly expand who we are and what we can become by engaging in daily personal growth. So really, if it comes down to choices and consequences, if you want the consequences of your life to be better, you got to change your choices. Something I have to do every day, something you have to do every day. We have to change our choices if we want a better outcome. Because if we keep making the same choice over and over again, we're only going to get the outcomes we're already getting. You got to remember, the capacity to limit is real. It's the maximum that you can contain or that you can produce. And once you reach your capacity, there's no room for anything more. And so this too is a choice. And as always, it's a choice that you and I get to make every single day of our lives. So here's my question. Are you okay to remain where you are, as you are, unchanged? Or are you ready to make room for space? I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me and have a great day.